Let my honesty spill out through the pages.
You're listening to Escaping the Rat Race. I'm your host, Amy Leo, a singer-songwriter and mental health educator. And our show is all about questioning the status quo and pushing the boundaries into what's possible for human beings and not probable. So tune in and get ready to escape the rat race, not only the monotonous 9-to-5 work grind, but also that incessant internal mental chatter that prevents most of us humans from experiencing more joy, peace, clarity, and freedom. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we knock into today's show. We do have the scholarship contest open, so you can find out more information at reviveyoursanity.com. If you've always dreamed about building a business, or if you're a new business owner, this is perfect for you. Again, we are offering a scholarship for Costa Rica this August, and there is one spot open for that. And I am very excited to be speaking with our guest today. Her name is Jeanne Catherine Gray. She's an advanced transformative coach and six-figure business owner. And today she shared with us a new kind of living and learning that's on offer for every human being. And good news for all of us that this kind of living deeply supports more success in life and in business. And ironically, it doesn't entail adding more to-dos, techniques, or internal pressure to your already busy schedule and system. So without further ado, let's get into today's call. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world today, whether you're on the coast of Thailand or maybe the city streets of London, or maybe you're even in a small town in America. Wherever you are, my name is Amy Leo from ReviveYourSanity.com. And today I got really excited because we have a fantastic guest speaker. She is a radio show herself on the CTR network, an advanced transformative coach. She actually also just got her master's in psychological well-being. And I think maybe most importantly for today's topic of building a business, she actually does have a thriving six-figure income and is very passionate about helping people to see something for themselves where they begin to live life in a way that there isn't as much human suffering, whether it's in building a business or from personal events of the past, like traumas and things like that. So without further ado, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to give over the mic to Jeanne Catherine Gray. Jeanne, if you could just give folks a little background about your story and what you're up to now, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Amy. That's so sweet. This is such a sweet introduction. I always wonder right now, like, how much of a background do you want? Because, of course, I'm getting older. I mean, it happens to all of us. And my background has changed. So what exactly are our listeners looking for? Do you want the business background, the personal growth background? What are we looking for here?
I'd like to hear some juicy details of the personal background first, and then let's move into maybe some business growth stuff.
Sounds good. You know, when I was young, I had a little bit different experience than sort of the commonly reported experience. And this is true for a lot of people who end up in the self-help sort of community seeking out wisdom and relief from suffering. But when I was 11, I started having chronic pain. And it started in my back, and it ended up being in my back, my neck, my head. I went to all kinds of doctors over a period of 10 years. And the very first doctor I went to was actually at Columbia Presbyterian in New York, which is a very well-known hospital. My mom had set it up and took many months to get in there, and it seemed like a big deal at the age of 14 at that point. And I remember going in and getting all of this really high-tech stuff done, right? So a special dye in my veins and special machines and more than one test. And at the end of all of that, the physician, wearing his white coat and everything, told me that there was nothing wrong with me and it was in my head. Now, anybody who has experienced chronic pain knows that this is the least welcome thing to hear from a physician. And at the time, I remember thinking, wait a minute, like, you don't know what's wrong with me. That's the answer here. And I did something a little unusual. A lot of people in chronic pain, one of the things they do is they feel ashamed of their pain, and they feel, when they hear that from a doctor, they feel like, you know, this must be my fault, but I can't quite figure this out. I can't put my finger on what I'm doing to make this happen. And so they get frustrated and angry and depressed and shamed. And I just totally didn't go there. It was just really grace. I just thought, this guy's an idiot. Like, so he has a white coat, right? So he's an expert. So he doesn't know what I'm going through. And so from that point on, I think I had a healthy disrespect for authority, actually, for expertise and for knowledge that comes from a book. And not to say that I'm not myself an intellectual, because I love reading, I love writing, I love discussion and debate. But I also came to understand that wisdom is something that is an internal experience that each person has for themselves, and nobody else can tell you if your wisdom is right or wrong. And so that started a journey where I began looking more deeply for well-being in more places and looked in a lot of different places, just like a lot of your listeners did. It's a very common thing that we look first outside of ourselves. And so I did that and had different experiences of healing over different periods of time. But all of those experiences involve this fundamental thing, which is our capacity for wisdom and insight, our capacity for really understanding what our next step is, even though it's not the same as somebody else's next step. And that's a built-in system that works on our behalf. And when people don't realize that, they tend to misuse the system. So if you've ever seen somebody who didn't like computers and they're having trouble with their computer and they're like hitting their computer or shaking their computer, and you think, wow, that's just not going to be that effective, right? That is an example of how somebody would be misusing a system. It doesn't work that way. It's not going to work better because you did that. But we tend to do that psychologically. We tend to choose routes or pathways that sort of go against our wisdom or our gut and create more harm than good. Not because we're not capable of doing something different, just because we innocently misunderstand where our suffering, where our hardship, where our difficulties are really arising from.
Yes. Well, I'd love to follow up and ask Jeanne, where does human suffering come from?
But this is a fascinating thing about human suffering, because I think we all think of it as inevitable. And in some sense, I'm going to say, sure, yeah, okay, it's inevitable. You're human, right? You're going to get hit by a car, or you're going to have a baby, or you're going to get divorced, or something's going to happen in your life, right? You're going to stub your toe. You're going to experience pain. You're going to experience emotion. You're going to experience some emotions that you've decided you don't like, right? That's all going to happen because you're human. But here's this phenomenal thing about how we're designed. We are actually designed for moment-to-moment living, which a lot of people are talking about in different fields right now. They're talking about in a lot of different ways. But if you can think about it as fundamentally, the simplest way we could talk about this is that you experience your consciousness, your awakeness, your awareness. You experience your consciousness at every moment. And wherever your consciousness is laid, wherever your attention is drawn, wherever you notice and wake up to what you're doing, whenever that happens, then you experience some living. And the living is painted through this universal energy. It's painted by this universal energy that gives you every sensation, gives you every emotion. It gives you all of your busy thinking. It gives you everything that you can experience through this energy. And so we have this capacity for painting our experience, and it is naturally built in that way. So when we get a grasp on that, that's the system and that's how it works, one of the common sense results is to stop suffering. Now, I'll give you a real world example. I worked for almost 10 years in the field of birth, of childbirth education and midwifery. And one of the things that I learned working with women in childbirth during their time of childbirth is that they all experience pain really differently. And some of them experienced pain and suffered a lot. And some of them experienced pain and didn't suffer. And so the difference, the quality of the birth was so different between those two people. Not to say that those people didn't have, I'm not saying like if you do this right, you're not going to get interventions at your birth. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying if you get a handle on your suffering, you're never going to have a problem where you look at your bank account and it's below zero. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that fundamentally, if you see through your suffering as layers of extra thinking, as meaning you've given to a situation, as perspective that is in its innate nature, its fundamental nature, shifting, never permanent, always changing. As you begin to see that for yourself, it makes less and less sense to add suffering to the equation of living.
Yes, I've seen that this is really true for myself as I've started to explore and just get curious of where and how my human experience actually unfolds. And I remember I've shared this before with folks, but it was so clear to me that I did have a choice in a moment of grace to either go down what sometimes we call a rabbit hole, so a habitual, sticky, suffering, resonance to it. It often has. I remember once getting up in the middle of the night to go for a cup of tea, and I heard the internal chatter in my head about my body image and this and that, and I literally just chuckled at myself and said, no, I'm not going there. And I actually was able to go to bed and wake up and pretty much almost forget it happened, because as Jeanne is pointing to, the system is designed that moment to moment, it is changing and shifting. And for me in my own life, the only way that I don't experience that is when I'm thinking so strongly that life is this one way that I'm actually cutting off my experience, and that what I'm focusing on, I'm actually getting more and more of.
A great metaphor for that is the weather. Because, you think about it, sometimes when the rain comes in, we feel really excited about it. I know people are like, oh, it's raining, it's so beautiful, so refreshing. Some people love the pouring rain, the thunder, the lightning. And then you have other people who are like, oh my gosh, when is it going to stop? I can't stand how wet it is, right? And you say, hey, how are you enjoying yourself? Oh, the weather sucks, right? And they're really unhappy with it. Now, when we think about weather as an analogy for our mental health, it's a great analogy or a great metaphor because it really allows for a system. There's a system at work. And it allows for a system that's really out of our hands in lots of ways. It's not personal. It's bigger than us. It works this way for everybody. So it's not like when the rain comes in, it only comes in for you. It's like the rain is kind of coming in and going out for everybody. And then there's this incredible capacity we have that is one up on that system, which is insight. And as wisdom and insight sort of occurs to us, what ends up happening is we stop worrying about the weather so much. We start enjoying the changes. We start feeling like each thing is unique and beautiful in its own living expression and worth sort of the living of it. And if there's some weather that's particularly drastic or difficult, it requires less suffering on our part and allows more resilience so that we can, as the storm clears, sort of pick up the tools and get to work on the house or whatever it is that needs to happen. Very logistically, very simply. So this really isn't a conversation about pull yourself up by the bootstraps, do your how-tos to get better, fulfill the prescription that I'm describing. This is really a description of how it works, and you only need to look at that for yourself. The more that you look at that for yourself, the more that you'll see if suffering fundamentally only works one way. There's only one thing happening when you're suffering. And what's happening is you have credited your personal power to an outside source, to an ex-husband or to a girlfriend or to a business or to a money account or to you name the content. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're suffering over it, it's because you've given something outside of yourself power it doesn't have, imagining that it could put feelings in you it can't put into you. And as soon as you wake up to that, it acts as a friend to you. It's a reminder. Oh, look at me. I'm all caught up and upset about this. I must be thinking something could cause that suffering in me. I must be thinking that thing out there could make my life harder or more difficult or have some kind of outcome that I can't live with, right? And this is exemplified by my husband had colon cancer 2 years ago, almost now. And one of the things we noticed when we were going through that together was what a lovely time we had. We just really, we really loved on each other. I didn't know if he was going to make it, and he didn't know if he was going to make it. It was like all the time that we thought we had was gone, and it was just the time we had. And as soon as that happened, we dropped a lot of arguing, a lot of petty stuff. We just naturally knew we didn't want to spend our time that way. We just wanted to love each other. We just wanted to be together. We naturally made some choices to allow that to happen just from that understanding. And so when people are faced with really drastic situations like death or like illness, one of the things that happens is this capacity to live in the moment and appreciate it becomes that much more enhanced.
Yeah, I can speak to that. When I've seen my grandmother when she was ill and then passed away, and then when I had a close call this year with actually literally being scheduled to fly into Brussels the day it was bombed. And I love what you're saying, Jeanne, about how it's really tailored for the individual with insights. And I find it so funny, even with my story about body image, how that was what I needed to see at that time. And then how without, exactly like what you're saying, without requiring willpower or for me to control my thinking or write in a journal, it just has not occurred to me over the past 9 months to get into that line of thinking. Because it's made up anyway, number one. So
yeah,
if I'm making it up anyway, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and I really want to encourage, if there's any business owners listening or people who are sort of, in a corporate environment or in an environment where they are creating their own business, one of the things they'll say when they hear this is, well, I've been working really hard, and it feels like, I've been working really hard and I've seen these kinds of impacts, and you can't tell me that's not doing something. So I just really want to speak to that I'm not saying that the time you've spent working at something isn't valuable. I'm saying that the time you've spent pressuring yourself about working at something isn't valuable. And there's a significant difference between those two. So the idea that adding pressure to the system, adding pressure to our mental health, adding, shoulds and pushing from inside, the idea that somehow is an effective way to really accomplish a task is a huge misunderstanding in how this psychological system works on our behalf, and how we can ride the wave of something we're working on to its natural unfoldment in a way that's far more effective. And frankly, you wouldn't know this unless you had experienced it. So it would make perfect sense to me if somebody was listening and thought, oh, this is just a crock, I'm not saying that I earn 6 figures because I don't work, or even that I work 4 hours a week. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying I really enjoy work. I really enjoy the things that I'm doing. I really choose and cultivate well-being because I know well-being is the first stepping stone to anything being truly successful. And I know that's true for all of my clients.
Yeah, I would love if you could speak more now to the business side. And I'm curious to see, what are some of the biggest kind of assumptions, or dare I call them myths, that you've come across with clients when they're trying to build or scale their businesses?
Oh gosh, so many. Like an infinite number of them, but I'll try to focus on the ones that are most common. Like, I think number one is if somebody's coming from a spiritual background, and I promise I'm going to speak to both. So if you're like a super practical person and the spiritual stuff seems like woo woo, don't worry about it, we're going to get to you. But people who are coming from a spiritual background who want to do good, they're really up against a lot. They're up against ideas about what doing good looks like. They're up against issues with charging money, which I find fascinating. Like, anybody going into business and who's incapable of charging money for the work that they do is really going to be up the creek, so to speak, without a paddle. And so there are assumptions about, and I see that play out in two ways. One, it might be a client someone's trying to enroll who says, well, this is a spiritual work, if they're, a coach or spiritual advisor of some kind. So, it should be free. But I've also seen business owners who are establishing their own business struggle with that kind of thinking. And so I would say right off the bat, that's something that you can sort of recognize is not that helpful, is not taking you anywhere. And if you really want to be spiritual about it, then, price yourself according to God. I mean, and get on with it. So get to work. Focus on the work rather than the money. Focus on what you're doing and have a fee that you charge and keep it very simple. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that I run into is people who want to make a lot of money. So they often will call me and say, well, I want to have my own business and I want to make millions of dollars. And those people who want to make money really think that money is where their well-being comes from. And so they're at risk constantly. They're constantly fluctuating emotionally with the fluctuations of business, which anybody who's in business can tell you that businesses fluctuate. So, one month you might be taking in 25,000 and another month you might be taking 2. Or one month, if you're a bigger company, you might be taking 1 million. Another month you might be bleeding something, right? So that's the nature of building a business. That's the nature of sales. It's the nature of sort of the ebb and flow of this thing that you're doing with your business. And over time, you get less of that fluctuation because more people know what you do and the quality of your work improves and, more people refer to you. And then there's a little less fluctuation. But even now, I know business owners I've worked with who worked for 30 years who say, that even now they're still sort of getting really comfortable with the time when nobody's calling, right? That's a natural part of their business, even though they're incredibly successful and are able to do everything they want to do with their businesses. There's still these periods of time where things fluctuate. So it's really key, both of these issues revolve around money. I mean, for people thinking about money. So people have a lot of thinking about money. They think money will provide them with some kind of, they think it'll provide them with basic needs. They think it'll help them avoid pain and suffering, that they will be better off with money. And so what I encourage business owners to do is get really comfortable with money as a resource that's one of many resources. And so money is not the only resource available to you at your fingertips. Some people have credit available to them. Some people have people available to them. Some people have time. Some people have the capacity, like just some internal skill sets that other people don't have. I mean, we all know we've met somebody incredibly charismatic and we think like, wow, or they're wasting that business skill, right? Or you meet some, is really good at managing the money, but has no capacity for building a bridge for clients to understand what they do. And so they're really falling down the job, not because their service isn't good, but they don't have the skill set. So all of those things are resources. And we have, usually each person has a mix of resources available to them. And if you're focused on money as your only resource, then you're really limiting your potential and the potential of what your business can do. So that's the first place to start, is to begin to recognize what kind of resources are at your fingertips, start utilizing those resources, and start getting really comfortable with money as not an oxygen or a lifeline, but as one resource or one means by which things occur, including food and shelter and all that good stuff.
Yeah. There is so many different layers of thinking, I think, when I speak to people that they're up against. And one is also this idea of failure or social acceptance. I see that with a lot of new business owners or people that are trying to create a career as a creative person, like a singer-songwriter or an artist. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's if you have that thing, you're probably not going to go very far, because people who are worried about what other people think of them don't provide the kind of service that people need. So
Mm.
I don't mean to say it in a way to discourage the listeners. I'm just saying that you can't really, imagine being a surgeon who didn't want to hurt anybody, physically, right? So you would go in there and like, well, are you sure they're numb? Are you sure they're sleeping? I don't feel very confident about this, right? So insecure thought is the only thing that really leads to outcomes that are undesirable, because it's not that, things happen, life happens, but there's a huge difference between the quality of insecure thought and the quality of confidence. And so if you're confident, that comes from experience of delivering services and trusting that people trust, and trust comes from experience. It's not even like a leap of faith. You just have to get experienced enough to know that you can call somebody out on what's, especially as a service provider, but even you can see it as a surgeon or as a social worker, or as whatever it is that your profession is. There's a certain boundary setting you have to do. There's a certain pointing in a certain direction you have to do. There's a certain wake-up call you have to make. Otherwise, you're not going to be effective. So imagine you're an organizer, or somebody who consults and organizes, and you go into somebody's house and you do all this organizing with them, and you never want to mention to them that the knick-knack collection or whatever, is really placed in a precarious place. And, you never bring it up that it could be redesigned in a way that would be much more attractive and safer and blah, blah, blah. And, that person has a problem down the line with that. Or you don't want to mention that you actually don't have to refile all these papers. Most of these papers you don't need, you can throw them out, right? But you're afraid to say that. You don't want to hurt their feelings. They love their paper system, right? So that what you're up against there in these very small examples is you're up against not providing a quality service to somebody. And you're up against really being forgotten either as unmemorable or as not helpful. Whereas if you can take the risk and say, look, I know you love this paper filing system, but I really want to share something with you. Can I? And the person's like, okay, go ahead. I paid you to do this. What is it? It's like, well, the truth is most of these papers you're never going to need. And if you do need one or two of them, you can go get them. They're all stored somewhere else. So I'm going to help you with this whole paper filing system. If you'll let me, I'd like you to clean it out. And let's just keep the ones that you need for your taxes over the next 7 years, or whatever it is that, is something you need to keep. Or let's keep your kids' pictures, right? Your memorabilia is organized and in a nice place where your kids can access them. Now, somebody's going to appreciate you. They may say, no, I'm not ready for that. That's okay. But likely they'll say, thank you at the end of that. This is so much simpler, so much more beautiful, so much easier. The kids and I love what we did with the memorabilias. And that's a very different way of being with your clients. There's actually a new book out. I don't know it's called Let's Get Real. And I have to tell you, it's a business book. And I have to tell you, I love the title. I just keep the book where I can see it because I love the title. I think the biggest problem business owners have is they're afraid to be real. They think real means being negative or being cynical or not, succeeding at what they want to succeed at. But being real just means be present, care about what you're doing, bring your attention to it, and speak up when it's not what you think it should be. And I'll tell you, I do this even with $25,000 clients. So I have clients who hire me to apprentice with me, and I only take a few clients like that a year. And when we go through that process of enrollment, I have a very high standard of criteria for who I want to work with. There's only a certain type of person I want to work with. And I don't mean like race, color, creed, gender, any of that, sexuality. I mean somebody who really wants to build their business and be an effective, increase the intensity of their outreach, be an effective change agent, and enjoy their lives while they're doing it so that they're thriving. So they're earning their income and thriving off of their service to the world. If somebody calls me and they want to pay me to 25, but they're not really interested in that, then they can work with somebody else, right? That's the let's get real part. The let's get real part is you don't have to take everybody who walks through the door. The clearer you are and the more specific you are and the more the more you go from the inside out about what you want to do with your business, the more success you're going to have. And you can't sort of be nice and do that, not in the way people are doing it now.
Yeah, I love how you're speaking to the wisdom that's on offer for every individual business owner and how that shows up differently for everybody, whether it's the clients that they're working with or the type of services that they're providing. I know one thing that I've had folks that I'm speaking with get into trouble is that they will either buy a book or enroll in an online training program or go for an MBA, any type of program like this. And it's very much formatted as a how-to. And the individual is following the how-tos, but still isn't really getting the results that were promised through the how-to. Can you speak to that?
I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, this how-to thing is so popular in our culture. So you go online and you put anything in. I mean, this is the funniest thing when somebody calls and it's like, well, I don't know how to do A, B, or C, right? I'm always like, how could you not know? Like, there is 100 internet sites for that how-to, right? So if you don't know how to build a website, well, there's internet sites for that. You don't know how to keep your accounting. Well, there's internet sites for that, right? And it comes in every form. You can see it in video. You can see it in audio. You can see it in, right? There's no mode of operation that's not available to you, no medium that's not available to you. So here we live in this incredible information age. And people are saying, well, I don't know how to get clients, right? I'm a great business owner, but I don't know how to get clients. Well, the truth is, they're probably not offering a quality service, number one, okay? If you don't have any clients and you're not getting any clients, then you have to look to the quality of your services. Now, having said that, I know some people listening will be like, but I've done all this training, I've done good work, and I know what I believe in, and blah, 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 blah. You know, people have a lot of thinking in response to that. And so what I invite them to do is, you know, really spend a concentration of time reaching out and connecting with other people and listening to how you can serve them. You know, and if there's something that you can do for them, then go for it. That fundamentally, that service is the most fundamental way to go about building a business. Now, can you like sign up for Instagram and Twitter? Can you have a Facebook account? Can you use a blog and social? Yes, you can do all of that stuff. But ultimately, if you're not connecting with and providing a service to another human being, if you're not inspired, if you're going through the wait list of what I've got to do to get through today, then your business isn't going to be sustainable because the quality of your services are not going to be sustainable. So one of the things I do with my blog, I love to write, but I know not everything I write is something everybody wants to hear about. And so I will share it with one or two people I'm close with and ask them for feedback. And we have a scale we made up, right? Now, I'm not telling you guys to go do this. I'm just telling you this is what I made up. I made up a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being, it sucks, don't ever put it anywhere. And 10 being, I feel so inspired. You know, I can't wait to read that again or share it or whatever. I just feel inspired by what you wrote. And so if they give me a number between 7 and 10, then it goes to publish. It's just put it on the blog. It's worth publishing. If it gets a number between 3 and 7, then maybe there's something to revisit here. Usually 5 and 7, and I can rewrite it. And if it gets like a number 1, unless it's something I'm passionate about and I want to revisit, just move on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be shared. It's not integral that everything be out in the world. So what I'm trying to say is that that's sort of a system I made up that works for me. And I bet I could put it on my website and sell it as a how-to, but that's not the system you are going to come up with as a business owner. You're going to come up with a system that works for you. And that system is going to be highly effective for you. And when that system is no longer effective, you're going to know that. You're going to think, oh, this system is no longer effective, right? I need something else here. I need a different kind of website. I need a different kind of, pamphlet. I need a different kind of book. I need a different kind of audio. I need to do a different radio show, right? You're going to have a sense of like, I'm ready to move on from this and do something else. I'm ready to grow into something else. And you follow that intuition. Because that intuition, that gut feeling, that insight, that revelation, that grace is far more powerful and will take you much further with less effort, hands down, all of the time, 100% of the time.
I love it. So simple. I actually have my colleague Meg on the line. I'm wondering, Meg, do you have any question to ask Jeanne before we wrap up?
You know, what's funny is I had questions and they've all gotten answered.
No way. Wow.
Well, I mean, to an extent, you know, like I might have worded them differently, but you touched on all of them, which was awesome. I was going to talk about like people comparing themselves to other businesses or other, you know, whether it's like weight loss and like social media images, or if it's like, you know, one business person to another, like why hire me when they could hire her, you know what I mean, or something like that. You touched on it when you're talking about the business stuff, but I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, no, I love that topic because I think it's a common misperception we have in a culture that sort of values individualization and competition, the idea that it's either me or her kind of idea. But, you know, Starbucks is infamous for when one of their cafes is failing. They're infamous because they don't shut it down. They bring in another Starbucks, very close proximity, maybe a block or two, right? And the reason they do that is they found if they moved two Starbucks into a certain area, more people came. So my philosophy is along the lines of, there's actually a book written many, many years ago, which I think it might be out of print now. It was called The Magic of Conflict. And it basically talked about this. It talked about how if you're sort of the only one in your area doing something, you're going to have a much harder time enrolling than if you're 10, 15, 20. The more people who are doing what you do, the more people who are looking for you, ironically. So there's that one piece. That competition within your field is actually super helpful. And I haven't actually seen a field yet. I'm sure it does happen where there's a tipping point for when that's no longer helpful. There's 100 therapists and only one patient kind of thing. But I really don't see that happening. Even in the world of psychology, I don't see that happening. So here's the deal. We are individually designed for certain gifts and certain skills. So and every once in a while, I did have a guy say this to me once. He called to see about working with me as an apprentice. And when he found out that I charged $25,000 for that, which is much less than actually my competition charges. If you think of them as competition, I don't. But he said, well, why wouldn't I go hire, Aaron Turner or one of these other people who are very well known in Three Principles community? And I said, if you feel that way, then you should, right? If you have a gut feeling that there's somebody who's right for you to work with, then go figure out how to work with them. Because that intuition, that wisdom, that's the way to go. And that's the thing about getting real with somebody. That's why when somebody calls to work with me, I always listen first for this is a good fit. And it doesn't mean that it's a perfect fit. It doesn't mean we don't have any kind of, maybe they find me brisk, right? That might be one way that people find me. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sort of this sense, like when you're gardening, and you have a sense that everything is growing in the garden and you're out there and you're working with the garden. And then you find something, you're like, well, this doesn't belong in the garden. And either you decide like, I'm going to take this out of the garden, or you are sort of curious about where it's going to go. So it's sort of a misplaced plant, but wow, where is it going to go? And what's it going to grow into? I don't know this one, right? That's our capacity as business owners. We have this capacity for gardening and for being with what's coming out and what's coming up. And when we listen to that kind of internal knowledge, that kind of wisdom, not revved up thinking, but gentle unfolding, when we listen to that, then we have a sense about somebody. And we might say, I would love to work with you, and here's why. Or we might say, as cool as it would be to get you as a client right now, I think you'd be a much better fit for Amy Leah, right? That's the potential. And as we become colleagues who are referring to each other and supporting each other, we create networks of tribes of people who are served best by the person they're working with. And so the whole competition piece becomes less and less intriguing, less and less interesting, and less real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think so. Well, we are basically running out of time, or we've kind of run out of time. But Jeanne, if you could leave listeners with one thing that you'd really want them to take home from the call, that would be great. And also, if you can share where people can reach you, that would be fantastic as well.
Well, that's often a question I ask people on my radio show at ctrnetwork.com every Monday at noon Eastern or 9 a.m. Pacific or 5 p.m. UK time. It's called Waking Up the Neuroscience of Awareness, where we talk about how our capacity for wisdom and insight really does impact many, many different kind of contexts of our lives. So we talk about a lot of different areas in our lives where that has a dramatic impact and improvement. And if there was one thing that I wanted people to walk away with, it's that your business is yours, not in a personal way. It's yours in the sense that you're designed to grow into something that's already sort of predetermined, not in a negative way, like the way you imagine an oak tree that's planted outside in the yard. You can imagine that within that seed is a holograph of everything it will become. So you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to put pressure on it. You don't have to try to redesign it to be a different kind of business or a different kind of tree. What you need to do is look deeply and follow that internal unfoldment that's going on and ignore the voices that tell you, well, really the best thing would be is if you got your PhD in this field and then you do A, B, and C or whatever it is. Ignore those noisy voices and listen quietly to your passion, your unfoldment, your joy, your sense of well-being, and allow that to be your path. And fundamentally remember, when an animal is swimming like a fish with a school of fish, or a bird is flying with a flock of birds, they can't see where they are in that arrangement. But that arrangement is occurring. And they have a purpose. They have a destination, even if they don't know what it is. And you're just like that. Each and every one of us is just like that. You may not be able to see it from here. It doesn't mean it's not true.
Oh, it's beautiful, Jeanne. Thank you so much for coming on our show today. Again, that was Jeanne Catherine, and you can also visit her at her website, which is www.divineplay.com. And I'm also thrilled to share that Jeanne is actually a guest faculty at our Costa Rican retreat in August this summer. So if you want more of this good stuff while exploring where the rainforest meets the sea, you can find out more information about that at reviveyoursanity.com. Okay, Jeanne, thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy and Meg. What a pleasure.
Thank you. This is awesome.
Take care, folks. Bye. I highly recommend that if anything that Jeanne said really resonated with you, that you do reach out to her at Jeanne@divineplay.com. She is an absolutely amazing woman and has just an incredible personal story of overcoming adversity. And then, of course, her business success kind of speaks for itself. My major take-homes for today is I really liked the notion that internally created pressure actually isn't required for success. And this is a real common thing I hear people saying, that, well, it's my anxiety that drives me and it's having these deadlines and that's when I perform best. And that may or may not be true for the individual, but what's not taken into account when people are saying that is the thought factor. You know, whatever we think is true, we're going to experience that to be true. So I'm not really quite sure if X really equals Y. You know, if having that internal self-critiquing heavy pressure is always the most effective way. From what I've learned about the mind, that when the mind is operating in a clear and calmer way, it actually is able to perform better. And then you as an individual and a business owner can take wiser action that's more in line with what your vision is. I really liked how Jeanne spoke to the how-tos of building a business as being helpful, but that they're really just an inspiration to draw from, and they're not the absolute truth, because there absolutely is not only one way to grow a business. So I hope that you were able to take something home from today's call. If you are enjoying these conversations and want to get them effortlessly and painlessly delivered to your device. You can subscribe on iTunes. All you have to do is type in Escaping the Rat Race with Amy Leo, and you'll be able to subscribe. And then if you could leave us a review, that would be really great too. We're a new podcast, so any review that you leave will be really useful for us in spreading the message and getting the word out. Until next time, thank you all so much for listening.